Well, I didn't find Hartford Communities That Care. Hartford Communities That Care found me. I was a middle school student, and I was mischievous is putting it lightly. But Mr. Wood saw something in me, and he pulled me aside, and he made sure that I stayed involved, and he did what it took to stay in my life, even as I grew and went through changes as a young man and became very difficult to deal with. Mr. Woods was always there, and Hartford Communities That Care was always there, teaching me things that I couldn't learn anywhere else, and trusting me in ways that no one trusted young people, allowing me to stand in front of groups of people and talk about complex data analysis and look at the problems that were going on in Hartford from a scientific perspective, and trusting me and my peers at the time to actually do the work and talk about the work in front of quote unquote important people. There's nobody doing that kind of work, and there's nobody trusting young people in that way. And it's a necessary component of pulling young people out of the difficult situations that they're in, that level of trust and that level of respect.
Hi, I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Well, tonight I'm just very, very glad for folks to come out and join us tonight. We have a very wonderful crowd, a lot of supporters from a variety of different agencies that have come out to support Communities That Care, much as they have done for years now. This year is very significant in terms of now 17 years of being in business, of working with families and children and the entire community to make things safer, but provide opportunities for people that live in this city. Tonight's guest speaker, our speaker has been a young man, Khiree Smith, who's been with us since the 7th grade. As you will soon hear, is that he's not only a Georgetown law student, he's also a graduate of Hampton University, went through Fox Middle School, started out with us back then, and he's been going off to do some wonderful things nationally and internationally. Tonight you're going to hear about our theme. Our theme is Staying the Course, and Khiree's going to touch on that. And one of the things about staying the course is that oftentimes you do fall back only to begin again and to continue to move forward. Staying the course for us is that we've had hard times as an organization, but we've had wonderful times. But also we've been very, very persistent. We've been diligent. We have been tenacious in our approach towards making sure our families and youth get the kind of support they need. Khiree epitomizes exactly the kind of individual who has had his stops and starts but continues to move forward. Tonight, that's exactly what you're going to hear about. And again, it not only epitomizes him, it epitomizes our organization in terms of our ability to continue to move forward. 17 years is a very, very short time in the scheme of things. We intend to be here for as long as we have to be, and we look forward to another 17 more years of providing the kind of services that we provided, the kind of support to families and youth, and learning opportunities that all of our children and families deserve. So welcome again tonight to our 17-year anniversary. I hope that you enjoy the program. I look forward to your continued interest in the work that we do, and God bless you and have a good evening.
I'll put it this way, Hartford Communities That Care is a vehicle trying to take people to a better place. And the car can't run without gas. You know what I mean? So when you ask why Hartford Communities That Care should be supported financially, and the answer is because it absolutely has to exist. And it can't exist without support. 3 words that describe Mr. Woods: patient, fearless, and I'll give you a personal one: hilarious. Mr. Woods he's hilarious.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed your dinner. Can you all hear me? Good, thank you. I ordered up a perfect sunset to kick off and to announce and introduce our keynote speaker this evening. And it is my pleasure to bring on stage and introduce Khiree Smith, Mr. Smith, and I say Mr. because when you read his bio, you understand why he should be identified as Mr. Smith, because it is indeed very impressive. Mr. Smith is a 24-year-old global change agent, bona fide youth philanthropist, international public speaker, alumnus of Hampton University, and a second-year law student at Georgetown. As founder and CEO of the Brilliant Group, Khiree uses his proprietary 5-phase habit cycle to train groups and individual clients to maximize cognitive ability and to channel it into creative entrepreneurship and general achievement. At age 11, he joined the Stump the Violence Youth Leadership Initiative at Fox Middle School in Hartford, Connecticut, where he was fortunate enough to meet and be mentored by Mr. Andrew Woods in the areas of public policy, research, and leadership development practices. Since then, if that's not enough, Khiree helped develop the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America's National Youth Leadership Initiative as they utilize preventive science and multimedia modalities to train, inspire, teach, and guide over 1,000 young people per year in leadership. Now you know why I said Mr. Smith. Over 1,000 young people per year in leadership and perpetuating healthy norms through both prevention and intervention. Widening his impact further, Khiree interned at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy in 2012 and was later appointed by the Secretary of Health and Human Services to serve on the National Advisory Council for the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. Khiree has spoken in over 40 states and in 5 countries across 4 continents. He addressed United Nations officials in Vienna, Austria, and coached young ambassadors from Peru, Italy, Austria, and Serbia to deliver presentations regarding their respective youth empowerment efforts in their countries. He also met with high-ranking government officials in Rome, Italy, to discuss approaches to youth drug prevention. Last year, he traveled to Abu Dhabi and Dubai, all places I want to go, to present at the first Global Forum on Drug Abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Mr. Khiree Smith. How y'all doing? All right. First things first, I want to make sure I thank Mr. Woods for bringing me in 12 years ago into the program and under your wing, and for bringing me in tonight. I want to make sure we give Mr. Woods a round of applause. Also, there he is. Also, I want to make sure I thank Dr. Ogbar. Dr. Ogbar actually did me a huge favor and mentored me when I was preparing to apply to law school, and he was a huge factor in making sure I got in. So please give Dr. Ogbar a round of applause. The second thing I want to say before I get started is, man, it feels good to be home. I tell you, the older I get and the more I learn about myself, the prouder I become to be able to say I was born and raised in Hartford Communities That Care and in Hartford. So I want y'all to give Hartford a round of applause. Please, 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 please.
What I want to talk about today is some of my favorite things to think about. And let's do this. One of my favorite things to talk about with my friends is building things out of thin air. And sometimes what I like to do is I like to think about the earliest versions of man and womankind. Imagine you were one of the earliest versions of man and womankind existing in the world as it existed at that time. Before we started touching stuff, before we started creating things, there was no language that you spoke. You were naked, right? You were standing just in the vastness of nature in the desert of Africa or the forest or the mountains, whatever the terrain, but you existed with nothing but your opposable thumbs, your brain, and what you did have was this unconscious feeling, this instinct that things needed to be better, that something needed to grow, that you needed to be able to secure food, protect your offspring. Life needed to be easier. You literally needed to build a world out of thin air. Now, what I like to think about is that period of time, and then I like to zoom back to 2015 and think about everything that we've built and everything that we've created, and I like to ask how. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine the nothingness of being in the beginning and everything we have now. Look around you. The utensils you ate your dinner with tonight, the device I'm speaking into right now, your clothing, the tools that made your clothes, the machines that made the tools that made your clothes, the automobiles we drove here in, even the air we're breathing right now is conditioned. All of this is a product of our work. Now, to really get where I'm going with this, you have to think of human beings as we actually are, as one collective body. You have to think of all the progress that we've made and credit it to us all. Think of us like we think of ants. We don't think of one ant as individually affecting its ecosystem or the world. We think of their footprint as a species. So you have to really think about everything we've done and all the progress that we've made and give credit for it to us all, and take a little bit of credit for yourself. And when you think about all the progress that has happened, it all starts to kind of seem miraculous. A microwave seems miraculous. A smartphone or a TV seems like magic, right? Cities, civilizations, economies, schools, companies, all of these things seem to have happened against all possible odds. But really, it's much simpler than that. I was in a small church in Baltimore a couple weeks ago, and Dr. Cornell West was there. And he reminded me when he said, complexity is the enemy of execution. The more complex you make a thing, the less likely you are to actually do it. And I know that's a little ironic coming from such a complex guy, Dr. West. And while I disagree with some of his politics, he's right about this. Most of the most profound truths about life and existence are very simple. And this is no different. To build a thing, to create something, it really only takes 3 steps. First, you have to decide. Now, at this stage, you don't even necessarily have to know what it is that you're building, but you have to decide that something needs to be better, and you're doing it. Not you're going to do it at some distant point in the future. Something needs to grow, and I'm going to build it. I'm building it, right? The next thing you have to do is, and this part is a little bit more difficult than it sounds, but you have to begin. After you've decided, after that point comes, you have to actually start. And further, you have to realize that that first beginning is only the first of many. Life is a series of beginnings, and you have to realize that you have to know when to find new beginnings. But we'll get back to that. The last step, and this is the most important step of all by far, is you have to stay the course. You have to stay the course. But what does that even mean, though? Like, you have to stay the course. That's my James Earl Jones. Yeah, I like that. Simba, you deliberately disobeyed me. You got to stay the course, all right? And we hear it all the time. You got to stay the course. Don't quit. Don't give up. Keep it going. You can do this. And it starts to sound like babble. It starts to sound like mush, and we take it for granted, right? But here's the thing. Cliches don't become cliches by being wrong. Cliches don't become cliches by not having any truth in them. They don't get repeated by millions and billions of people over the course of history by being false. They don't get repeated by mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and wise people who need to pack a lot of truth into one moment by being false. So absolutely, you have to stay the course. You have to. It wasn't until my first year of law school that I really understood the story of the tortoise and the hare. My grandfather used to reference it when he used to wake my brothers and I up at ungodly hours in the morning to go chop logs or rake leaves or shovel snow or build something. And I would show up, and from jump, I would be going 1,000,000 miles per hour, expending all of my energy. And he used to kind of laugh and say, "Have you ever heard the story of the tortoise and the hare?" And then sometimes he'd tell it. Now, for the life of me, for the longest time, I couldn't understand why the tortoise was the person you wanted to be. I just didn't get it. I mean, you got the hare who's talented, and he's like passing the tortoise and taking a break, and passing him and taking a break, and he's like doing the cabbage patch and the nay-nay, and like he showboating, he got swag, and it's just like, you know, I'm growing up in Hartford where for me, showboating was a way of life. It's like you can do valuable things, but if you don't look good doing it, it's almost like you didn't do it. You know what I mean? You gotta strut like a peacock. You know what I mean? But to take another jewel from Dr. West, eventually you get older and you realize peacocks strut because they can't fly, right? And the thing is, you look at the tortoise, and he's slow, and he's consistent, and he's boring, and it doesn't really make sense. And I found myself saying, okay, well, the hare, he lost this one, right? But he has the talent. He'll win the next one, right? Or if he did this differently or that differently, he would have won. But here's the thing. This is what I didn't understand about that story. And after a quarter century of living, one day it finally clicked. That race wasn't just one race. That race was life, and you don't get a next one. There is no next one. See, if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves making a lifetime of excuses for the hare, saying, well, he has the talent. If he did this or this, he could win, or he could win the next one. And we'll say it for ourselves. We'll say, well, I could do that. We'll watch other people out actually achieving things, and we'll draw comfort from knowing that we have talent and knowing that we could do it. But here's the thing about could. It inevitably becomes could have. And could have is in the past, which makes it just as valuable as can. They're both worthless. Sipping my water. Let me tell you guys something I learned from my mom. Men, and you guys know this, I'm sure. If you want to make sure you never find you a good woman or a good wife, get real comfortable talking about what you could have, would have, and should have done. You be as single as you want to be, I guarantee it. What? Am I lying? See, to build anything, you have to know how to stick to it. You have to figure out how to be consistent even if you can't be constant. To build a thing, you have to learn how to embrace the mud. You have to account for the misfortune as it kicks down your door. See, to build a thing, anything, a better life, a better family, a better career, better technology to create a better world, better ideologies to re-inject love where it has been replaced with ambition and greed and malicious patriarchy and policies that purport to be blind to race but are actually only blind to racial injustice, but that's a different story. We'll get back to that. To build a thing, to build anything worth building, you have to stay the course. You have to. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. What it takes to build a thing. A couple months ago, my friends and I took a trip to Brazil. And my best friend and I, before we went, we said we wanted to go cliff diving. We wanted to find some tall rock or some cliff and jump into some body of water. We want to. Now, on the third day, after we had a tour of Pau de Açúcar, which is Portuguese for Sugarloaf Mountain, we come down and there's this like exclusive beach, and across the ocean, we see a huge rock and a person standing on top of it. So we look at each other, we say, if he jumps, we're going over there.
he jumped. So we make our way through the forest. There are monkeys and indigenous birds and whatnot. And eventually we find this completely dangerous assortment of huge rocks and sharp rocks and water and locals who barely spoke our language. And we got there and we had another decision to make. Do we really want to do this, right? So now, the hard part for my best friend, my roommate, was making the climb. But that wasn't the hard part for me. The hard part for me was after I had gotten to the top of the rock and I saw how really high it was, and I stood there thinking, oh man, I'm supposed to jump. I had to figure out how to convince myself to actually do it. And I tried everything. I prayed. I told myself, I'm going to do this. Khiree, you are going to do this. But it wasn't until one moment came when literally I had one thought. I'm doing this. It wasn't I'm going to do this. It wasn't me thinking about all of the details and all of the things that had to happen in order for me to actually do it. It was, regardless of all that stuff, I'm doing this. And once I had that thought, there was nothing else to think about. And I jumped. And I earned one of the greatest experiences of my life to date. Until that moment comes, when you stop saying, I'm going to do this when I can learn this thing first, or get this thing first, or get this funding, or that funding. Until you say, I am doing this, things will not begin to happen. And that's the truth. Next, you have to actually begin. Sarah Breedlove was a black woman born in 1867. So life was already going to be pretty hard for her. But if that's not hard enough, she was orphaned by the age of 9. She was married by the age of 14 and widowed by the age of 19. And then all of her hair started to fall out. Now, most people wouldn't blame or wouldn't have blamed Sarah for balling up into a corner and just giving up and calling it the end. That's probably what many of us would have done. But instead, Sarah decided to begin. She started the Walker hair care system, invented the direct sales style of marketing, became Madam C.J. Walker, the first female millionaire of all time. All because when it should have been the end, she decided to begin again. Louis Latimer. He worked as an office boy at a law firm that specialized in patents. Now, in that time, a black man with that kind of a job, he could have been okay. But instead, he decided to begin again. He taught himself mechanical drafting, got promoted to draftsman, and then went on to work with Alexander Graham Bell to invent the telephone, and then himself invented the carbon filament light bulb, which, if you don't know, made light bulbs actually usable, because Thomas Edison's version was too expensive and didn't last long enough for anybody to actually use it. So because this man, when it could have been the end, decided to begin, he brought light to the world. I got one more. My man Charles Drew, already in the 1930s, had a medical doctorate. He was already a black doctor in the 1930s. That obviously could have been enough for him. He could have called it quits then and probably still would have gone down in history. But instead, he enrolled at Columbia University, got a doctorate in medical sciences, and then invented a system for separating red blood cells from blood plasma, allowing blood to be stored for longer than the limit at the time, which was 1 week. This man invented blood banking, all because when it could have been good enough, when it could have been the end, he decided to begin again. That's what it's all about. Understanding that, number one, you have to begin the first time. But even after that point, life and success and building things is a series of beginnings. So you decide, you begin, and then you have to stay the course. I knew a beautiful girl. I used to know a beautiful girl who lived in a house full of mirrors. There were mirrors everywhere. There were standalone mirrors and mirrors on doors. Some of the walls in the house were completely made of mirrored glass. And I know that sounds like a fantasy, but the only problem is she was desperately, clinically depressed. And the irony of it was she saw love everywhere she looked. She loved everything about the world. People, animals, plants, children. She saw love everywhere she looked except inside herself. And most of my friends who I know who have struggled with depression, there's a common theme. They say the hardest part is waking up every morning and finding a reason and will to peel themselves out of bed, knowing that they're just going to have to do it the next day, and the next day, and the day after that. Now, I know many of us don't suffer from depression, but isn't that one of the great questions, one of the great conundrums of life? How and why should I keep getting up, keep pushing forward day after day in perpetuity when there's no way to tell if it's actually going to pay off in the end? And furthermore, when things really get disgusting, how do I find the energy? How do I find the will to stay the course? Well, I'll tell you what I wish I told her. Life can suck, and it does suck, and it will suck often, sometimes for no reason at all. But although the overwhelming variables of the human condition can drag you lower than imaginable and kick you while you're down there, you always have a choice. You always have a choice. When I was an undergrad for about 2 years, I battled homelessness. On and off, I was homeless for 2 years. I had to go to the blood plasma center to donate plasma twice a week to afford dollar store sausages and TV dinners, just so I could eat, because all the money I was making from traveling and doing all that stuff you heard about in my bio was going to my tuition. I met Mr. Woods in about 2003. And a few years later, when the economy collapsed and it became almost impossible to secure funding, I watched him go without a paycheck and almost without sanity to keep the doors open. And he's still doing the work today. The point is, good people get struck by lightning too. You can count on there being a time in your life when you will be brought to your knees by hardship and pain. But when that time comes, when you feel like there is no one who understands you, when there is no reason to stand up and breathe and push forward just one more day, you have to recognize and remember that you always only have two choices. You can take the hit, fall down, and not get up, or you can keep going. There will be a time when you have reason to be on the ground and become all too familiar with rock bottom. Now, when that happens, some people decide to stay down, and they decide to pretend like there aren't these dreams and aspirations that they once wanted so desperately. And you can be one of those people too. That's an actual option. Or you can keep going. When things get that ugly, you always only have two options. You can accept it and fade into nothingness, or you can remember that you can always keep going. I said I wasn't going to do this, but it's too fitting. My favorite poem is called Invictus. It goes, out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud, and under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll, because I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul. So I need you to understand something. When that time comes and you feel like there is no reason to keep going, to push forward, to straighten up, to stand up, I need you to envision the earliest versions of man and womankind, and I need you to accept some of that credit, accept some of that progress, and I need you to smile with pride as you realize that the only reason any of it is possible, any of this is possible, anything that has been built, anything that you've built, anything that will be built is possible, is because we stayed the course. Y'all have a good night.
And now you know why I called him Mr. Smith. Thank you, Khiree, for sharing those insights and those words of encouragement. I heard several things from him this evening. He shared with us, in order to build things out of thin air, you must do three things. Three things are critical. He said that you have to decide or make the decision. You have to start or begin. And number three, you have to stay the course. He also shared with us that peacocks strut because they cannot fly. He also shared that in the game of life, you only get one game. And then finally, I'll say it again, the critical importance of staying the course. Mr. Khiree Smith, thank you very, very much.
Hey, thanks again. I hope tonight that you enjoyed our program. The crowd was very, very pleased and excited to hear such a young man who has come up out of this community, one of many. I mean, when you think about Khiree and his message, is not so indifferent than a lot of the experiences that a lot of youth in our city and across this nation, especially young men of color, have continued to not only have the challenges, but surmount those challenges and so forth. Khiree inspired us to continue to move forward, to stay the course, to do the job necessary, not only for himself, but for his family and this community. Tonight, we really, really enjoyed having you with us tonight. We really hope that you continue, again, stay tuned with the kind of work that we're doing. Stay close and pay attention to individuals like Khiree inside our community, because there are many of them like him and hers that are out there, young females, that is. And so again, thank you for joining us here at Hartford Communities That Care 17th anniversary. And again, we hope that you can join us next year and a lot of the other activities that and services we provide to the community. Thank you very much.
If I had to give one word of encouragement to young people to help make their lives better, I would tell them, you have it. Everything that you need, everything that is going to take to change your situation, to build a better life, you already have it. The task is to realize that you have it and realize what it looks like for you so that you can use it. But it's not about going out and trying to find something new to be able to get what you want. It's realizing what's already inside you and realizing that it is there and you were born with it. You have it.